Hey everyone! Tonight we're not just talking about medieval history, we're stepping right into it. Picture this, you're lying on a straw mattress, the kind that seeps through the flimsy linen and rubs against your back just enough to keep you from falling asleep. The air in the room is cold and sharp, smelling faintly of smoke and boiled cabbage. Outside, the wind whistles through the trees, rattling the wooden shutters. You pull your itchy wool blanket tight around your shoulders, trying not to think about the lice crawling near your neck. Spoiler, unless you really like sleeping together and waking up covered in hay, you probably won't survive this. But that's okay, because tonight, you don't have to. You're just here to listen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Leave a comment telling me your local time and location. Are you listening to this at midnight in Boston, or maybe 3 a.m. in Manila? I'd love to know. Now, turn off the lights, crank up the fan to some soothing music, and let's go on this evening's journey together. You crawl deeper into bed, straw rustling under your feet. Winter has arrived, and you live in some medieval village in England, maybe near Norfolk, or maybe Yorkshire. Honestly, no one's paying attention to you. You probably aren't either. You're too busy trying not to freeze. Medieval winter isn't about warm mugs of hot chocolate or binge-watching movies under a cozy blanket. It's survival mode. No electricity, no central heating. Just you, your family, and a small fire that's trying its best not to go out. The wooden walls of your house creak with every gust of wind. Your little house is what modern people might generously call rustic. In reality, it's 4 walls of glue and mud, basically. Slats of wood covered in mud. When the mud cracks in the winter, you plaster it with new layers, sometimes mixed with straw, moss, and, if you have no other choice, cow dung. It's not pretty, but it keeps the cold out. Well, mostly. Sort of. Historians are still debating whether it's great insulation or just another reason why medieval houses smell like zoos. The roof above is thatched, which sounds romantic until you realize it's constantly leaking. When it rains or the snow melts, you reach up and stuff the excess cloth or straw into the holes. Sometimes you even sneak into your neighbor's field and steal some grass to patch up your own roof. By the way, it's a classic medieval practice borrowing materials without asking. Some historians say it's the origin of passive-aggressive neighborly disputes. Others say it's just good coordination, medieval style. Your bed isn't anything fancy. If you're lucky, it's just a pile of straw in the corner, maybe tied together with an old sack. The straw isn't changed often. It's expensive to buy new hay in the winter, so it's full of things you don't want to think about. Lice, fleas, mites. You scratch your head just thinking about it and it itches. But here's the thing, you're not sleeping alone. No medieval peasant slept alone, unless they were extremely unlucky or extremely unpopular. Your whole family is huddled together to keep warm. Mom, dad, siblings, maybe even grandma if she's still alive. And yes, everyone is breathing the same stale, smoky air. It's not exactly a 5-star spa resort, but it's better than freezing to death, which is a real possibility. People actually keep track of who's made it through the winter, like some dark medieval fantasy version of football. Tonight, you can hear pigs snoring in the corner. That's right, your livestock are in the house with you. Pigs, goats, chickens, whatever you have, they generate body heat, and in winter, every degree counts. This practice, by the way, is still up for debate. Some historians say it's purely practical. Others suspect it was also used as an early burglar alarm. After all, nothing wakes you up like a goat stepping on your face at 3 a.m. As you lie there, the fire crackles in the fireplace. It's the heart of the home, but it's tricky. Too much wood and you might burn the house down. Too little and you'll wake up with icicles on your eyelids. Some scholars believe this delicate balance of keeping the fire burning led to medieval patience. Others just think it leads to a lot of singed eyebrows. Your breath makes little clouds in the cold air. You try not to think about it, but survival is always on your mind. You whisper a small prayer to wake up tomorrow, keep the family warm, and maybe not step in goat shit on your way to the bathroom tomorrow. Outside, the village is covered in frost. Thatched roofs glisten in the moonlight, and the fields are frozen solid. A dog barks somewhere, but it's too cold to care. You pull the covers tighter and close your eyes, listening to the sounds of winter, a medieval lullaby of creaking wood, crackling fire, and the slow, steady rhythm of survival. The morning passes slowly, only a sliver of light filtering through the cracks in the wooden walls. You lie there, eyes half closed, feeling the cold air hit your nose while the rest of your body remains curled up under the shared blanket, snuggled up with your family like a pack of sleepy puppies. Even the pig is dozing in the corner, its fat little body twitching as if dreaming of more delicious food. There is no alarm clock, no phone ringing beside the bed, just the natural rhythms of medieval life urging you to wake up. You stretch carefully, trying not to wake anyone else, but the straw mattress beneath you still creaks. Your back aches a little, because that's what happens when you sleep on the same rough blanket every night. You scratch your shoulder, wondering for the 100th time if you'll ever get used to the fleas. Breakfast is nothing fancy. Usually it's yesterday's bread, hard and dry, unless you've soaked it in your morning soup, a warm stew of grains and whatever vegetables are still edible after sitting in a corner all winter. Occasionally you'll find a piece of onion in it, if you're lucky. A bit of bacon will float to the top. But honestly, that rarely happens. You slowly sit up, pulling your clothes out of the pile near the bed. They're cold, rough, and smell of smoke and sweat. But they're yours, probably your only outfit. Historians argue about this. Some say medieval peasants had two sets of clothes, one for everyday wear and one for special occasions. Others say no, it was just one set, patched and worn until they were almost tattered. In any case, it wasn't a washing day. You only wash your clothes maybe a couple of times a year, or whenever they start to smell like something has died in the corner. You wrap yourself in a long sweater, cinched with a simple rope belt, and stuff your feet into leather shoes that are barely considered shoes anymore. They're more like stockings. Really, holes in the toes, paper-thin soles. Most days, you just walk around the house barefoot to keep them in good shape. Archaeologists have found old medieval shoes with bones sticking out of the front, evidence that people played the same game as you wearing them until they died. The first thing you do every day is to start a fire. You trudge to the hearth, where you buried the embers beneath the ashes of last night. If you did it right, they're still smoldering, like little orange eyes blinking at you. Otherwise, you'll need to grab a flint and steel and start a fire until your fingers are numb. Some people back then believed that keeping a fire going was more than just keeping warm. A warm hearth meant a happy home. Others believed the idea came from stressed-out parents yelling at their children when the fire went out. Either way, be careful. As the fire crackles again, you deal with the livestock. The pig in the corner has left you a small overnight gift. Several. Actually, you shovel the pig shit into a pile near the door. It smells. Yes, but you don't waste it. It's mixed with straw to make compost. You were recycling before it was trendy. Then it's time to go outside. The winter air hits you like a bucket of ice. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, watching your breath come out in little white clouds. Around the village, others are starting their day. You see Thomas at the woodpile, breaking it with hands that look more like roots. Agnes is chopping ice over the water bucket. You wave, she waves back, but no one wants to talk for long. It's too cold for that. The fields are frozen solid, so there's nothing to do. Instead, you focus on winter chores, chopping wood, mending fences, repairing tools. Occasionally you help patch the roof, especially if there's a leak right above your bed. If you're lucky, you'll be hired to work for the local lord, perhaps sweeping the manor's courtyard or carrying firewood. In return, a hot meal will feel like winning the lottery. By mid-morning, it's time for a snack, more cold bread. Maybe some cheese if you're lucky enough to have a goat. Cheese is how you survive the winter, turning milk into something that won't rot tomorrow. But medieval cheese wasn't always delicious. There's a story from a 12th century monk who described cheese as biting. Some say he meant it was spicy. Others think it was raw. You hope today's cheese isn't the biting kind. In the cottage, you help spin wool. Your grandmother sits by the fire, spinning yarn into a thread with a shuttle. Her hands move unconsciously. Her lips hum softly. Some historians believe that spinning was so central to medieval life that it shaped the way people thought about time. Others say it's just a cliché, but you spin anyway. Everyone spins. It's the medieval version of fortune-telling, except with useful yarn. The day drags on. You can feel the wind coming through the cracks in the walls. It creeps in like an uninvited guest, its cold fingers brushing against your skin. You pull your cloak tighter and glance out the door, wondering if it's going to snow again. Too much snow means you're stuck indoors. Not enough snow. The spring crops won't get the moisture they need. Medieval life is basically one long weather app update. As the sun sets, you're back by the fire, listening to the crackling of the wood. Your family is gathered around. The pig is back in its corner. Someone's stirring the soup for dinner. It smells exactly like this morning, maybe a little worse. You think about tomorrow. Colder, more chores, same as always. Historians still argue about whether medieval peasants were miserable or simply good at survival. You think it was probably both. You lean your head back against the wall, your eyelids drooping. The fire is warm, your belly is full, and the pig is snoring again. Life isn't easy, but somehow you're still here. Night falls. As usual, early and sharp in the middle of a medieval winter, you enter the house, cheeks flushed with cold, breathing like little ghosts in the dark air. The sun has not yet set behind the hills, but your body feels as if it has been awake for days. That is the scary thing about life without electricity. When the sky turns black, so does everything else. You look around the little house, noticing the shadows stretching and trembling. The single tallow candle on the table flickers weakly, barely blocking out the darkness. Tallow, by the way, is not an expensive wax, it is just animal fat, poured around a wire. The scent is memorable, like lighting a stick of butter and letting it burn. But you can't afford beeswax unless you are a noble or a churchman, so tallow is what it is. Your grandmother mumbles as she taps the fireplace. She was trying to stretch the firewood to last another week. Firewood was scarce in the winter. The forest belonged to the Lord, not to you. If you cut down a tree without permission, you risked punishment, possibly a fine, possibly a hand being chopped off. Historians debate how strict those forest laws were. Some say they were brutally enforced. Others say that villagers would sneak out at night to collect dry wood while pretending not to see each other. You know which version is more realistic. You sat down near the fire, huddled next to your family, wrapped tightly in your rough woolen cloak. The pig plopped down again, making its usual low squeal, a sound both unpleasant and pleasant. The smell of smoke clung to your clothes, mixed with sweat, dirt, and animal fat. Your nose didn't even register it anymore. It was just life. There's no TV, no TikTok, no latest fantasy streaming show where knights fight dragons while their hair is perfectly blow-dried. Your entertainment is simpler stories. Your dad clears his throat and starts telling the story of the Green Children, the strange tale of two brothers wandering around Woolpit, their skin tinged green like new leaves. Were they fairies, or were they from another world? No one knows. You've heard the story dozens of times, but it still makes you shudder. Your grandmother continues with a local ghost story about a spirit in the woods who steals the breath of travelers. It sounds scary in theory, but you're afraid the cold will suffocate you while you chop wood tomorrow. You pull the covers higher, just in case. Outside, the wind picks up. It whistles through the wood, tapping your cheeks with cold fingers. You hear the howl of something in the distance, maybe a wolf, maybe just the wind playing. Either way, you don't bother to check. Finally, your mother begins to recite her prayers, her voice soft and rhythmic. The prayers are in Latin because that's the only way they're usually said. You don't understand most of them, but they soothe you anyway, like a lullaby passed down through the centuries. The story turns to saints. Saint Bridget, who keeps the house warm. Saint Nicholas, who protects children. You've never actually seen a saint, but you like to think they were, because hope is cheaper than wood. Historians sometimes debate how much medieval people actually believed these stories versus just had to. But for you, at the moment, it doesn't matter. One of your siblings asks about the plague, not exactly a bedtime story, but life in the Middle Ages wasn't always comfortable. You listen to your father tell stories about how the Black Death swept through villages like yours, turning your neighbors into ghosts overnight. You don't like to think about it, but you can't help it. Fear of disease is a part of everyday life. You've seen people with boils. You've seen people coughing uncontrollably. Everyone does. Even now, years after your worst nightmare, you wonder if the disease will return. Some say it's a punishment from God. Others whisper that it's just a passing fancy. When the stories end, you glance up at the rafters overhead. Between them are herbs and garlic, hanging to dry. Some for food, some for medicine, some just to ward off evil spirits. Whether they actually work, no one knows, but you don't want to risk it. Your mother shares small pieces of honeycomb with you, the good kind. For special nights like this, honey is precious. It comes from the village beekeeper, and each spoonful costs more than you think. The sweetness spreads across your tongue, and for a moment, you almost forget how cold your toes are. Finally, it's time to go back to sleep. You crawl back onto the straw mattress, curling up between your siblings, the blanket pulled up to your chin. The pig lay down beside you with a sigh, its warm body radiating warmth like a small, furry fireplace. Your father tossed a few more pieces of ash into the fire, hoping the embers would burn until morning. As you drifted off to sleep, you heard the wind rustling against the walls of the house. The nights were long, and the winters were longer. But somehow, you would get through it. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants had more nightmares about wolves or about taxes. You think it was probably both. Winter morning comes slowly. You blink awake, buried under wool and straw and the warmth of human bodies. Your brother's paws are on your back, and the pig is still snoring softly, his breath coming out in little puffs of mist. The fireplace is a pile of ash now, barely warm. Your nose is numb with cold, your fingers ache, but you're alive. And that's a victory. You sit up carefully, trying not to disturb the frost that's creeping into the corners of the house. Your breath hangs in the air, white and soft like ghost smoke. Everyone's breaths blend together, a small cloud of life in an otherwise silent house. There's no clock to watch, no alarm to fall back asleep. Your day's rhythm is dictated by the sun, which means you often wake up before it does. Your stomach growls a reminder breakfast. But don't get too excited. Medieval breakfasts weren't bacon and eggs. They were more like stale bread, sometimes dipped in light beer or thin barley porridge. Milk was scarce and the winter cows didn't produce much milk, and you had to save what little you had to buy butter or cheese. Historians still debate whether peasant diets were as bad as stereotypes suggest. Some evidence suggests people ate better in the summer months. But what about winter? Winter was all about survival, not luxury. You chewed the bread slowly, trying to soften it with your teeth. It was coarse and heavy, made from rye and barley, not the fluffy white loaves that lords usually had. Sometimes there were bits of husk or grit left in the grain, which meant your teeth were likely to wear out prematurely. That was only part of the problem. You swallow, and with your bread you take a sip of light beer, a light beer brewed at home because water isn't always safe to drink. Beer kills germs. Wine is for the rich. Beer is for everyone. After breakfast, you help your mother patch the holes in your cloak. Her hands are spinning wool, her fingers moving rhythmically. The wool is itchy, but warm. You look at her hands and think about how clothes are never just clothes. They are tools for survival. If you don't patch them up, winter will creep into every stitch. Outside, the village is starting to move. A few neighbors shuffle past, wrapped in cloaks and hoods, their faces barely visible. Everyone has the same goal: to survive spring. You hear the click of wooden clogs on the frozen ground, the soft murmur of early conversations. Someone's goat bleats in the distance, complaining about the cold, as if goats are suffering too much. You grab a wooden bucket and head to the well. The rope creaks as you lower it, your muscles tense with cold. Sometimes the well freezes, and you have to use whatever tools you can find to chisel away at the ice. Today, you're lucky the water is just slush. You scoop it up, careful not to spill it. Every drop counts. On your way back, you notice a strange footprint near the edge of the village. It's too big for a dog, too small for a horse, a wolf. Maybe, maybe not. Historians debate how common wolf attacks were in medieval Europe. Some argue that the fear is exaggerated. Others point to actual records of entire villages being stalked during harsh winters. You choose not to think too much about it right now. There's work to be done. Winter chores are different. There's less farming, but more work. You gather what's left of the firewood, sweep the ashes from the stove to make room for the next small fire. You help your father check the roof for leaks. Medieval houses weren't known for their insulation. Thatched roofs need constant maintenance. If the snow gets too heavy, it can collapse. No one wants that. It's almost impossible to repair in the winter. By noon, the villagers gather near the church. They come not only to pray, but also to hear news, gossip, and warm themselves. The stone walls retain heat better than most cottages, and sometimes the priest lets people sit inside a little longer, just to warm up. The church bells ring in the cold air, a sound both comforting and ominous. You wonder if the saints can actually hear prayers. Today's sermon is about patience and humility. As usual, the priest's voice echoes off the cold stones as you sit quietly on the hard bench, your toes numb, your mind wandering. You think about how strange it is that the church controls almost everything, including who can and cannot read. The books are written in Latin, so even if you could read, you wouldn't understand most of them. Knowledge is locked away. Some say that's just the way the world works. Others wonder if it has to be this way. After church, you help your neighbor patch a hole in his fence. Cooperation is the rule, not the exception. No one survives the winter alone. You trade labor for favors, not coins. Coins are rare here. Much of life is conducted by barter eggs for cloth, repairs for bread, firewood for help with animal care. Historians still debate how much money actually circulated in villages like yours. Some say it was virtually non-existent. As the sun begins to set, you rush to finish your outdoor chores. You spread straw in the pigsty to keep warm. You check the smokehouse, where you hang the hams, the precious few reserved for emergencies. The meat is now hard as a rock. It must be saved until spring, that's all. On your way home, you pass the village healer's hut. Smoke rises from her chimney, carrying the strong scent of herbs. She's the one you go to for cuts, fevers, and mysterious ailments. Some call her a wise woman, others whisper of a witch. Historians still debate where medicine ends and magic begins in medieval villages. You don't really care, as long as she keeps people alive. By the time you get home, the sky is purple and yellow, the last light of day failing. Your fingers are numb from the cold. Your nose is red. But you're here, and there's still a roof over your head, and that's enough. When you get back inside, the pig next to you nudges you, demanding attention. You scratch behind its ears, grateful for its warmth. Night falls again, and you know exactly what awaits you: darker, colder, and hopefully more stories. You fall asleep again on the straw bed, wrapped in layers of old robes and a blanket that smells strangely of smoke and goat hair. Every now and then you curl up because someone rolls over and elbows you in the ribs. Maybe it's your nephew. Maybe it's someone's bony knee that's lost its place and slid sideways onto you. Everyone huddles together like logs in a fire, all hoping to make it through the night without freezing. You lie there, listening to the breathing. There's soft breathing, there's heavy breathing, and there's the breathing of animals huddled in the corners, sending little clouds into the cold air. Sometimes you can actually feel the warm breath of a cow or goat against your back. They're just like you, seeking warmth, asking no questions. Man and beast huddled together, a medieval heating system that costs nothing, unless you count the occasional goat hoof to your face. But of course, you can't sleep through the night, because the fire in the hearth, the tiny fire in the middle of the house, won't burn itself out. It's the lifeblood of your household, and if it goes out, everyone will wake up with icicles on their brows. So you take turns keeping watch, refueling it when it starts to die down. There's no alarm clock, no fancy smart speaker whispering to you to wake up. The only notification is a sharp nudge of an elbow or someone muttering, "Your turn." So you rub your eyes, scramble out of your warm limbs and robes, and shuffle toward the fireplace. The embers are barely alive now, tiny red dots that blink at you from beneath the ash, like sleepy cat eyes. You poke them, add twigs, toss in some dry straw, and blow gently to keep from choking on the smoke. Sometimes you even have to sacrifice some bedding, pulling handfuls of straw off your body because, well, keeping warm now is more important than having a soft place to sleep later. Everyone knows that keeping a fire going is a matter of survival. Letting it go out means waking up stiff and cold, wondering why your toes don't belong to you anymore. Fire watching was no great pastime. You sat there, blinking in the dark, nudging logs, muttering curses about winter. Sometimes you dozed off for a while, then woke up in a panic, thinking the fire was out. But it was still there, crackling softly. Fire was your friend, and it was also the reason you couldn't sleep. Even children, at least those old enough not to burn themselves to death, had to take turns keeping watch at night. There was no such thing as letting the children rest in medieval life. By the time a child could hold a stick, they were part of the rescue squad. They crawled out of the warmth, rubbed their eyes, groped toward the hearth, and poked at the embers with trembling hands. and they learned, early in life, how not to burn the house down. That was your first lesson, not from books, but from real, shaky, real life. Old people often slept closest to the fire, not because they craved warmth, but because they were living libraries. They were the keepers of stories, the ones who knew how to grow beans on rocky ground, how to make porridge from almost nothing, how to patch a hole in the roof with mud and a prayer. And when the air outside was cold enough to freeze your thoughts in mid-sentence, protecting the old people was everyone's top priority. They might not have liked being near the fire all night. Sometimes their cloaks were uncomfortably hot, but better a burnt sleeve than a frozen old man. Time moved slowly in the medieval night. When no one was up to poke the fire, people tried to breathe quietly. Taking deep breaths in the cold was dangerous. Inhaling too quickly could make your lungs feel like they were made of cracked glass. You've seen too many neighbors cough silently in February, so you learn to breathe shallowly, through your nose, trapping the heat before it hit your chest. Every now and then you would pull a cloth over your face, covering your mouth just to warm the air a little. In the morning, the cloth would be damp, clinging to your skin, but at least you were still breathing. Better to wake up with a cloth over your lips than to wake up without one. Outside, the wind was still howling. You could hear it seeping through the cracks in the walls, whispering through the cracks you had stuffed with moss and straw and whatever else you could find. The wind always found a way, but you didn't get angry. You just pulled your cloak a little tighter, curled up like a winter hedgehog, and closed your eyes, hoping that dawn would come before you froze into some strange new furniture. You finally fall asleep, curled up under layers of wool and straw and whatever else passes for bedding in your medieval home. But just as your body begins to relax, the sun begins to rise, or at least the sky turns from pitch black to the gray that passes for morning. There's no alarm clock, no phone ringing on the nightstand. Your alarm is the crowing of a rooster, the excited screech of someone who's never heard of a snooze button. Roosters, by the way, are nature's worst morning creatures. They don't care that you've just spent half the night building a fire. They don't care if your back aches from sleeping on straw. They go on screaming anyway, convinced that the world needs to know it's time to wake up. And so, willy-nilly, you roll out of bed. Your first steps are stiff, your knees crack, your shoulders ache, and there was frost in places you didn't even know could freeze. The inside of the cabin felt like the outside of a refrigerator. You could see your breath in the air, tiny wisps of water vapor escaping with each breath. You wiggled your fingers, trying to wake them up, and rubbed your hands together to warm them. This was no time to lounge around sipping coffee. This was a time to move, or you'd freeze in place like a medieval garden statue. Breakfast wasn't exactly a feast. In winter, the usual meal was whatever you'd saved up months ago, maybe some hard black bread that could be used as roof tiles, or a porridge so bland that oatmeal looked like a luxury dessert. If you were lucky, there was some dried meat left, hanging from the rafters like old socks. You chew slowly, partly because it's as tough as leather, partly because you know there won't be anything else until spring. And then there's the soup. Medieval peasants were masters of the eternal pot of soup. You'd cook it for days, sometimes weeks, adding water and whatever else you had on hand. Did you add turnips yesterday? Great. Found some cabbage today? Still in the pot? Dropped a spoon? Well, at least it added iron. Historians are still debating whether the medieval pot of soup was truly so endless, or if it was just a romantic idea that moderns came up with because they loved the idea of communal cooking. But there's evidence for it: bones boiled until tender, stale breadcrumbs soaked in the broth, and herbs when you were lucky enough to find them. The result was less savory stew and more ambitious warm water, but on a cold morning, that's all you needed. After you've eaten, you don't have to linger and talk about your dreams. There's work to be done. The animals are hungry, and the frost on the ground won't melt. So you grab your cloak, yes, the same one you slept in, and step outside. The door creaks as you push it open, revealing a world that looks as if someone has sprinkled it with shards of broken glass. Every surface is glistening with frost. Your breath mists before your eyes, and your feet crunch on the frost, leaving tiny ghost footprints in the dirt. First, stop the animals. The cows, goats, and chickens depend on you. Even if they stare at you like you're late, you check their water troughs, which are probably frozen solid. That means you need to break the ice, usually with a stick or a rock. Sometimes, if you're feeling particularly unlucky, you have to use your bare hands. There's a special kind of cold that comes when you dip your fingers in ice water first thing in the morning. It's the kind of cold that makes you question your life choices, even when you don't have any. Feeding the animals is just as important. You throw hay to the goats, grain to the chickens, and maybe if you're lucky, a few crumbs to the pig. Of course, the pig is looking at you like it knows how this will end. Medieval pigs are smart. They've been through enough winters to know that if there isn't enough food for everyone, someone might decide pigs are dinner, so the pig stays nearby, hoping today isn't its day. Once the animals have been fed, it's time to take care of the human stuff. Maybe you'll go to the well to get a bucket of water, your hands red from the cold. Maybe you'll check the traps you set the day before, hoping a rabbit or bird will come along to supplement the soup. You can collect firewood from the woodpile, though, by February. The woodpile is often a memory, and you have to forage for it in the woods. That's when you start breaking the rules, sneaking into forbidden land to get fuel. Technically, it's illegal. The Lord owns the woods, but try telling that to your numb fingers. And then there's the toilets, or rather, the lack of them. You walk to the edge of the village, find a quiet spot, and do your chores. In the dead of winter, this is no easy task. You squat down, your butt exposed to the icy wind, and you wonder for the 100th time why no one ever invented indoor plumbing. Historians still debate the sanitation of medieval villages. Some say people were dirtier than we think. Others say they made a conscious effort to be hygienic under the circumstances. But one thing is certain on mornings like this. Everyone agrees that warmth is more important than soap. You finish your chores, rub your hands together, and look up at the sky. It's still gray. The sun is barely a whisper on the horizon, but you're moving, you're breathing, and for now, you've survived another cold medieval morning. Congratulations. Winter is only a few months away. Now that you've finished your morning chores, it's time to figure out how to survive the rest of the day. Remember, medieval winters weren't about survival. They were about not freezing, not starving, and not being crushed by thatch falling from a roof that hadn't been repaired since the fall. So you trudge back home, pulling your cloak tight around your shoulders, the edges stiff with frost from your breath that had seeped in overnight. Inside, the fire has burned to glowing embers. You kneel beside it, prodding the coals with a stick and whispering some desperate promise to the hearth like, "Please, catch it this time, and I won't throw in any more wet moss." Building a fire is an ancient skill, and even today, historians debate the average amount of time it took a peasant to build a fire each morning. Some sources say they kept the coals burning all night, while others say they were just really good with flint and steel. Either way, you try to get the fire going again, just barely. It crackles, sending out tiny sparks that threaten to set your cloak ablaze, but you don't care. A small accidental burn sounds warmer than the situation at hand. As the fire settles into a steady glow, you take on the next important task: mending your clothes. Medieval life isn't all about running from wolves or dodging knights on horseback. Much of it is about sewing, patching, mending, and figuring out how to make a pair of boots last longer than any other pair of boots. You sit by the fire, squinting at your tunic in the flickering light, threading a needle that looks like a miniature spear. You sew patch upon patch until your clothes resemble a survival blanket. Every stitch is crooked, but it holds up, and that's all that matters. Outside, the village was abuzz. You could hear buckets of water, goats bleating, and someone shouting at a goose in the distance. Every medieval village had a goose, a feathered tyrant who thought himself master. No one knew why geese were so fierce, but historians have debated it for centuries. Maybe they were just naturally fierce. Maybe they were secret descendants of dinosaurs holding grudges. Or maybe they were just cold and took their anger out on everyone. Whatever the reason, you stayed away from the goose when you went outside. The village green was quiet, a thin layer of frost crunching the grass under your feet. You nodded to your neighbors as you passed Matilda, bent over but still carrying firewood, and John the miller, grumbling about this and that. Medieval villages were tight-knit, not because people loved each other, but because surviving the winter meant sticking together. You shared food, traded chores, and looked out for each other, even if you occasionally argued about who borrowed whose pot. By midday, the sky hadn't changed much, still as gray as an old piece of wool stretched overhead. But you kept moving. It was time to do some odd jobs around the village. Maybe you helped mend fences, tying them together with pieces of rope that used to be something else, clothes, maybe, or fishing nets. In the Middle Ages, nothing went to waste. If it couldn't be eaten, burned, or worn, it was reused. That's why you might see someone using an old shoe as a doorstop or patching up a wall with scraps of cloth. Historians love to argue about how resourceful medieval peasants really were, but if you were around, you know the answer: extremely resourceful. Once the chores were done, or at least done enough to avoid immediate disaster, you might gather with others in someone's home. Usually, it was the house with the biggest fireplace, because warmth was more important than personal space. People huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, exchanging news, telling stories, and enjoying a cold stew that had been eaten for days. Someone might pull out a lyre or a wooden flute and play a tune older than anyone else in the room. The music was melodious, the notes hanging in the smoky air like tiny glimmers of hope. You closed your eyes, tapped your feet to the beat, pretending for a moment that you weren't worried about tomorrow's weather. And then there was the gossip. Medieval villages were small, and news traveled fast. Who was flirting with whom? Who was pregnant? Who had stolen eggs from whose henhouse? It was all whispered, punctuated with laughter or dramatic gasps. Often, it was not malicious. It was the only form of entertainment until Netflix was invented 800 years later. Sometimes the gossip was about far-flung things, like rumors of war, plagues, or kings who married and beheaded their wives for fun. Historians still debate how much the average peasant knew about politics. Some believe that villagers were largely isolated, while others say they were surprisingly well informed, thanks to traveling merchants and gossipy monks. Either way, you heard enough to keep your head spinning. As the evening drew in, you felt sleepy from the warmth of the fire. Your eyelids droop, your muscles relax, and for the first time all day, you feel almost at ease. Almost. But just as you're about to fall asleep, someone thrusts a broom into your hand. It's time to sweep the hearth, mend the thatch, or fetch the water again. There's always something. And so, you get up, shake off the sleepiness, and head back into the cold. Your hands are chapped, your back aches, but you keep going, because in the medieval world, surviving winter isn't about resting. It's about moving forward, step by step, through the frost and the fog, until spring finally arrives. By late afternoon, the light is fading faster than you'd expect. In medieval winter, the days are short, and darkness stretches across the fields. You glance up at the sky, watching the sun sink below the horizon with all the eagerness of someone crawling back into bed. There's no electricity, no streetlights, no soft glow of a phone or tablet, just the world fading away until it's swallowed by darkness, and that means you need to prepare for the night once more. Before heading home, you stop by the community bread oven. Every village has one, usually a massive stone structure that stays warm long after the fire has died. Today, you're lucky your family has access to an oven, which means you have fresh bread wrapped in cloth under your arm. Well, freshness is relative. It's dense, dark, and chewy, more like an edible brick than the soft, spongy loaves you'd find in a modern bakery. But when it's cold, the food sticks to your ribs, which is exactly what you need. Plus, it gets your jaw moving, which technically counts as exercise. On your way home, you pass the church. Its simple stone walls loom over the village, and its steeple leans against the snow. The church is not just a place of worship. It's also the center of life here. Weddings, funerals, markets, and meetings all take place in or around it. You may not know much about what's going on in Rome or London, but you know the name of the local priest. He's probably the most educated person you've ever met, or at least someone who can read without squinting. You pause, contemplating how faith and fear were intertwined in medieval life. People believed in miracles and saints, but also in curses, demons, and the evil eye. There was holy water in one bag and a lucky charm in the other. Historians still debate how much of medieval belief was official religion and how much was ancient folk magic passed down from ancestors. Probably both. It wasn't unusual for someone to pray while hanging a dead mole on their door to ward off illness. Hey, anything goes. Back at your cabin, it's almost pitch black. The cabin creaks as you enter, the wood shrinking from the cold. You put bread on the table, brush the snow off your cloak, and prepare for the night shift to survive the winter. First thing first is dinner, which looks strangely like lunch and breakfast combined. bread, vegetables, maybe some leftover stew. If you're lucky, someone might catch a rabbit or trade you for some salted fish. You don't care much about variety. Calories are calories, and in winter, that's all that matters. You sit and eat slowly, letting the warmth of the food spread through your belly. The fire crackles, the shadows dance, and for a brief moment, the world feels strangely warm. You even laugh at the neighbor's joke. Who stops by to tell you about how their goat tried to eat a shoe this morning? There's always a goat causing trouble. After dinner, it's time for evening chores. Yes, again. Surviving a medieval winter is like living in a repetitive cycle of chores. You check on the livestock, make sure the doors are closed, and prepare the fire for the night pile ashes on the coals to keep you warm until morning, if you're lucky. The embers are still burning when you wake up. If not, you'll be begging the fire god for mercy. Sometimes, you'll pass the long dark hours with stories. Oral storytelling is the medieval version of Netflix, except you don't get to choose what you watch. The oldest person in the room is usually the one to lead the conversation, telling tales of local legends, saints, or strange happenings in nearby villages. You might hear about a knight returning from the Crusades with a magical relic, or about a woman who lives in the woods and can talk to wolves. Some tales are cautionary tales, warning you not to venture too far from home after dark. Others are completely absurd, such as the story of a fish falling from the sky during a storm. Historians are still uncertain whether medieval people actually believed these stories or simply enjoyed the entertainment, probably both. Then there are the superstitions. Someone might warn you not to sweep the floor after sunset. You're inviting evil spirits into your home. Someone else might warn you not to whistle indoors. As it is said to summon demons, believe it or not, you whistle anyway. Why risk it? As night falls, you finally lie down on your bed. It's not your usual bed, just a wooden frame with straw piled on top. Maybe you'll have a sheepskin if you're lucky, but probably not. The straw pricks your back, but it's better than the cold floor. You pull a thick blanket over yourself, made of wool that still smells faintly of sheep. Everyone sleeps in the same room, breathing together. The air warm with human warmth but heavy with the smell of smoke, sweat, and animals. Privacy isn't really important in medieval villages, and neither is comfort. Before you fall asleep, you listen to the sounds of the night, the crackling of the fire, the creaking of the rafters, and the occasional howl of a wolf in the distance. The wolves are real, not a fairy tale. They're out there, watching the village, waiting for their chance. You hope they stay away tonight. Your eyes close, your breathing slows. You've made it through another day. It's all anyone could hope for in a medieval winter. The night stretches out before you, cold but familiar, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. In the middle of the night, you turn under the rough wool blanket. Your nose is cold. It always is, since it's the only part of your body exposed to the cold air. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the chickens that are quietly roosting near your feet. Yes, chickens are sleeping, not exactly glamorous, but they're warm. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants regularly slept with their animals, but right now, you're pretty sure no one cares about academic debates on a cold night like this. Outside, the wind whistles through the cracks in the walls. You listen for a moment, half asleep, wondering if it's just the wind or something more ominous. Medieval nights are full of sounds you can't explain. Is that the neighbor's cat again? Or is it a wandering ghost from the woods, trying your luck? You don't really want to find out, so you pull the blanket tighter and drift back to sleep. By the time you wake up, it's still dark. Winter mornings in your village begin slowly. No one wants to crawl out of bed before they have to unless someone is checking the fire. That usually is you. You shuffle toward the hearth, fingers stiff, breath puffing in the cold air. If you're lucky, a few embers from the night remain, flickering beneath the ashes. If not, you have to start over, tapping flint and steel with your cold hand. Finally, the fire roars, giving off enough warmth to stop your teeth from chattering. You look around the room. The children are still wrapped in blankets. An old woman mutters her morning prayers. Animals move quietly in the corners. Above you, herbs and onions hang from the rafters, drying for future meals or perhaps to ward off evil spirits. The Middle Ages loved their multi-purpose decorations. Breakfast is simple, some stale bread, maybe porridge if you're lucky. And yes, there's beer on the table. Before you judge, Remember, it's safer than water. Historians still argue about how much alcohol medieval people drank. But let's be honest, when your well could give you dysentery, a mug of weak beer starts to look like medicine. After breakfast, you head outside. The air is chilly. The sky is still gray. You tread carefully on the icy mud path, watching for patches of ice. A fall could mean a broken bone, and there's no hospital in the village. If you're lucky, maybe someone knows how to bind a leg with sticks and cloth. If not, you'll just get a new nickname like Hugh the Lame and live with it. Medieval branding is harsh. You check on the animals. The cow's breath comes in soft clouds, and the pigs grunt in the cold. You feed them the leftovers, reminding yourself that they're more than animals, they're survival. A healthy cow means milk later, and milk means life. The rest of the day stretches out before you, filled with tasks you've done 1,000 times. Maybe you'll fix the roof, collect firewood, or mend the fence before the snow falls. If you're really unlucky, you'll have to trudge into the woods for firewood, hoping you don't run into wolves, or worse, robbers, or superstitions come true. They still talk about it. You know, lights in the sky, spirits in the woods. Even now, historians argue about how much medieval life was shaped by real events and how much by stories whispered around the fire. You suspect both are true. By mid-morning, the quiet village is still quietly alive. Smoke rises from chimneys. Children chase each other in oversized coats. Old men sit near doorways, eyes half closed, watching life pass by. You look around and realize this isn't just another cold day in the middle of winter, it's just another day in your world. Harsh, yes, but survivable. And now, you've made it through another cold night. The sun rises slowly, though it doesn't bring much warmth. You're used to it by now. In winter, the medieval sun is like a lazy cat. It comes late, lingers in the sky for a few hours, and then disappears before you can enjoy it. You squint at the pale light, wondering if it will be a dry day or if it will snow unexpectedly. Weather prediction is part guesswork, part myth. Some people swear by watching cow behavior. If they lie down, it means rain. If they stand, it means clear skies. Right now your cow is, well, half lying down, chewing its cud. So, good luck guessing. You decide to head toward the village common. There's no official meeting today, but people usually get together when they can. After all, you can't check social media or text your neighbors. News spread through whispered conversations, shared chores, and occasional church announcements, usually about taxes or sins, sometimes both. Historians still debate how much free time peasants actually had. But you know this in the winter, when the fields are dormant under frost, you get brief periods of rest, just enough time to chat, sharpen your tools, or, in your case, to overcome boredom. In the clearing, a group of villagers are gathered, talking quietly. You overhear a few words. Someone's goat wandered into the woods last night, and they're debating whether it would be safer to bring it back or just declare it lost to the spirits. Yes, the woods are that spooky. Even now, as the sun is just beginning to rise over the hills, mist swirls between the trees, as if the world is still deciding whether to wake up fully or remain hidden. You lean against the village well, arms folded, listening. Someone says that Father Aldrich, the local priest, has found strange footprints in the snow near the church. Maybe it was just a fox, but of course the village is abuzz with rumors. Maybe it was the devil. Maybe it was St. Cuthbert visiting. Medieval life was full of explanations that modern people might call superstitious. But when the world was cold and uncertain, we found comfort in stories, even scary ones. Historians still debate whether medieval people actually believed these stories or just enjoyed telling them. I suspect it was both. Suddenly, you remember something: the communal oven? It's your family's turn to bake bread this afternoon, which means you need to get to work. The communal oven is one of the few communal facilities in the village, a giant stone oven in the middle of town where everyone bakes bread. It saves firewood, and it's also a good excuse to chat while the dough rises. You chuckle, thinking about last week's bread incident, when Marjorie accidentally dropped the dough on the mud floor and still managed to bake it. No one complains. As always, hunger trumps cleanliness. When you get home, you gather your ingredients. Medieval bread wasn't exactly spongy or delicious. It was dense, coarse, and sometimes had bits of oatmeal or even dirt in it. Some loaves were so tough that they were reused as plates, the famous bread plates. You eat them until they're soft enough to chew. But today, you make plain rye bread, the kind that fills your stomach and reminds you that the next holiday is still a long way off. Kneading the dough warms your hands, which is a small blessing. You think about the cycle of the seasons. Winter seems long now, but eventually the ground will thaw, the crops will sprout, and you will be working in the fields again. For now, life slows down. There is time to bake, mend clothes, and maybe tell stories by the fire later if you can keep the fire burning. At midday, you take your dough to the communal oven. The air smells of smoke and yeast. You chat with the other villagers, each waiting for their loaf to cook. Someone tells a joke about monks and beer. Another complains about the Lord's new taxes. A third says they saw a fairy circle in the woods yesterday. You smile politely, but keep your comments to yourself. Maybe it was mushrooms. Maybe it was Bechek. Historians still argue about how much medieval peasants actually believed in fairies. But you know better than to say anything. Better safe than cursed. When the bread is done, you wrap it in a cloth and head home. Your stomach is growling, but you save the bread for dinner. In the meantime, there's still work to do. There's always work to do. The afternoon falls over the village like a heavy woolen cloak, thick and silent. You glance up at the sky, noticing how quickly the winter light fades. The villagers say, 3 things never wait the tide: the sunset and the Lord's tax. Unfortunately, you've seen all 3 sneak up on everyone. Today, at least, you only have to face the fading light. You check on the livestock before dusk sets in. The chickens are in their coops, their feathers ruffled like little blankets. Your goat is chewing on hay absent-mindedly, staring at you as if it knows something you don't. You fill your trough with the rest of your provisions, careful not to let a single grain fall. Every grain counts until spring. It's strange to think that your entire survival through winter depends on a simple equation. Enough feed for the livestock means enough feed for you. The food is gone, and the equation becomes much bleaker. Inside, your family is gathered around the fireplace. You sit cross-legged on the floor, warming your hands over the flames. The toast you toasted earlier is now sliced into thick, chewy slices. Dinner is simple bread, a little cheese, and some stew from yesterday, reheated in an iron pot. You dip the bread into the stew, letting it soften enough to not crack your teeth. It doesn't taste too special, but it's filling, and in winter, that's all that matters. While you're eating, someone mentions the upcoming feast of Saint Bridget. It marks the beginning of February and, with it, a glimmer of hope for spring. It's said to be the time when the earth begins to awaken, if only a little. Even if the frost is still on the ground, historians debate whether peasants strictly adhered to the church calendar or mixed it with ancient pagan traditions. In your home, it was a combination of both. You would light a candle to Saint Bridget and also keep an eye out for signs of the first lambs being born. After dinner, you fished out a spindle from your bag and began spinning wool by the fire. The soft whirring was strangely soothing, like medieval white noise. You wound the wool around the spindle, your fingers moving automatically. There was something soothing about spinning, about turning coarse wool into something soft and useful. Sometimes you wondered how many thousands of years people had been doing the same thing, staring into the fire, twisting the wool between their fingers. It made you feel small, but in a good way, like you were part of something much bigger than yourself. Your grandmother sits next to you and tells a story while you spin. It's about a knight who gets lost in the snow and is saved by a mysterious old woman who turns out to be a spirit of winter. The moral isn't clear, but everyone listens. Stories aren't always about lessons. Sometimes they're just about passing the time, about making the hours between dusk and bedtime easier. Then you help patch a tear in a tunic. The needle is tiny, but the fabric is rough, making the job difficult. Still, it's better than letting the cold seep through the hole. Medieval clothing wasn't plentiful. You couldn't just order a new hoodie online. If something was torn, you fixed it. If it was worn out, you patched it. Finally, when the fabric was completely ruined, you cut it into strips to bandage your stuff. Nothing went to waste. Outside, the wind picks up again, whistling through the cracks in the walls. You throw another log on the fire, but not too much. Wood is precious. Your family glances at each other, silently calculating how much is left in the pile. You'll have to gather more tomorrow if the snow stops. Stretching out your arms and yawning, you think about tomorrow's chores. The days are repetitive, but that's part of what keeps you alive. Routine is survival. You don't really mind. Winter life is quieter, slower. Sometimes it feels like a gift, sometimes it feels like a prison. Tonight, it feels like night has settled over the village. A soft, heavy blanket of fog, cold and silence. You can hear the distant hoot of an owl, perhaps perched in an ancient oak tree by the river, and the occasional rustle of a small creature scurrying across the frozen ground. Inside your little house, however, everything is quiet. The fire crackles, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and people move more slowly, conserving energy as if it were another form of food. You lie down on a straw mattress, pulling a coarse wool blanket up to your chin. It rubs a little, but it's better than freezing. There's no privacy in a peasant house, no separate bedrooms or closed doors. Everyone sleeps in the same room, often in the same bed if there's room. It's not just comfort, it's survival. Shared body heat was one of the best defenses against the bitter cold of the Middle Ages. Even animals sometimes slept close to the walls of houses, their warmth providing only a little extra insulation. Historians still debate whether medieval peasants actually slept through the night like modern people. Some historians believe they followed a pattern of segmented sleep. Two distinct periods of rest separated by a brief wakefulness around midnight. During that time, people might pray, tend the campfire, whisper stories, or just lie quietly, staring up at the rafters. Tonight, you wouldn't mind if that happened. There's something strangely peaceful about being awake while the rest of the world is still sleeping. Before you fall asleep, you listen to the sounds of the house, the steady breathing of a family, the soft rustle of someone under a blanket, the crackling of wood in the fireplace. These sounds are ordinary, yet precious. They signal that life is still going on, breath by breath, in the middle of a cold winter night. You remember what Father Thomas said in his last sermon? He said that winter is like a mirror. It shows you who you really are. Will you share your last piece of bread or keep it for yourself? Will you help your neighbor fix the roof or pretend not to see the leak? Historians still debate whether medieval villages were truly tight-knit or were rife with rivalry and gossip. Maybe both are true. Maybe survival brings out the worst and the best in people. Your mind wanders as the fire burns out. You think of the fields sleeping under the snow, of the lambs yet to be born, of the spring that awaits somewhere after this long, cold winter. You think of the ancestors who came before you, who spun wool, herded goats, and gazed at the same stars you see now. Somehow, knowing that they survived makes you feel like you can survive too. When sleep finally pulls you down, you remind yourself of tomorrow's chores: chopping wood, checking the riverbank for traps, patching another hole in the roof. The list goes on. But for now, none of it matters. For now, you're warm. For now, you're safe. And in a medieval winter, that's enough. The coldest hour of the night comes quietly, creeping into the village just before dawn. It's when even the embers of the hearth begin to die down. Flickering like tired fireflies, you shift in your sleep, pulling the covers tighter, your nose nuzzling the rough wool. Your breath clouds the air into soft white wisps. Outside, frost carves patterns in the cracks of the windows, frozen ferns and tiny stars that will disappear as dawn breaks. This is when survival is at its most fragile. Your body burns away the last of its warmth before the sun returns. Some villagers don't wake up after nights like this, especially the elderly or the young. The cold is patient. It doesn't strike with swords or storms, it simply waits, slowly wearing you down. That's why the people of your time consider winter more than just a season. It's an opponent, a challenge. And overcoming that challenge means surviving the long night, one heartbeat at a time. There's a strange comfort in knowing that you are not alone in this struggle. Every little house in the village is now going through the same thing, huddled under blankets, shivering just enough to survive. Of course, the rich have stone mansions and thick furs, but even they know that when the frost comes, it doesn't care about titles. Snow covering a king's roof is just like snow covering yours. Historians still debate how the medieval people really felt about death. Did they fear it or simply accept it as a part of life? Some say that peasants resigned themselves to death, believing in the rewards of heaven. Others think they feared it but masked it behind rituals and prayers. You're not sure what the truth is. But you know this lying here in the cold darkness, you hope to wake up. You hope to see the sun set over the hills again, even if it's just a pale winter light that warms your face. Your stomach growls softly. You wonder if there's any broth left in the pot from last night. Probably not. But even thinking about it helps you forget your fears. In the Middle Ages, hunger was almost as persistent as the cold. There were no grocery stores or storage facilities, just the hope of a good harvest, or dried beans and salted pork that would last until spring. Some nights, like tonight, you imagine the first green shoots popping up from the thawing ground. It's a dream worth keeping. Somewhere in the village, a rooster crows early, confused by the dim light. You smile. Even the animals are anxiously awaiting the morning. The neighbor's dog barks once, then stops. All these little sounds connect you to something bigger, the silent, faithful endurance of medieval life. You adjust the blankets one last time, curling up to keep warm. The fire needs to be lit, but not yet. For now, you lie still, listening to the last whispers of the coldest hour. Finally, the sky begins to change. It's not quite dawn yet, just a glimmer of darkness, as if someone somewhere has lifted the lid to the world. The stars fade, one by one, as the sky turns from black to deep blue, then to gray. You open your eyes and watch the light slowly creep through the cracks in the walls. It's still cold, but somehow the chill has softened. That's the power of morning. Even in medieval times, the promise of survival, at least for another day. You sit up, wrapping the blanket around your shoulders like a cloak. Your breath still comes in little puffs, but you're used to it by now. Your joints crackle as you stretch hips, shoulders, neck, all stiff from sleeping curled up on the straw mattress. The straw rustles beneath you, itchy and uneven, but better than the bare floor. You brush the debris off your clothes, knowing you'll see more later. The fire is mostly ash. A few embers flicker in the wood, blinking languidly like purple eyes. You poke them with a stick, coaxing them to life. It takes patience and practice. Too much air and they die, too little and they suffocate. You blow gently, your lips forming a small O. The sparks flicker, playful and wild. Finally, a glimmer catches on a dry twig, and you add more wood, one by one. Soon the cabin smells of smoke and pine again, a comforting scent in this cold world. You glance around. The others in the house are still asleep, huddled close together, sharing warmth like stacked logs. It's a communal way of life. Privacy. That's a modern invention. In a medieval village, privacy is rare, and the concept of a private room simply doesn't exist for people like you. Sleeping together is how families survive. Now that there's light, you notice the frost patterns on the walls, a delicate lace of white crystals running along the beams. Your breath adds to the beauty, like another layer of winter art. You think about scraping it off later, but for now, you simply admire it. Nature has its own way of decorating. Outside, the village begins to stir gently with the movements of people. You hear the clink of buckets hitting the well, the soft murmur of someone greeting the morning with prayers in Latin or Old English. Maybe they're thanking God for letting them survive another night. Maybe they're just praying for better luck today. Historians often wonder what the daily lives of medieval peasants were really like. Some paint a picture of endless misery, others of simple contentment. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Life was hard. Yes, but people laughed, told stories, fell in love, and looked forward to the little things. Just as you do now, a hot bowl of porridge, a rare sunny day, a moment of frost on the roof. These are triumphs. You stand up, shaking off the stiffness and pain in your legs. Your sweater hugs you in awkward places, and the cold stings your ankles. You pull your cloak tighter. It's time to check on the herds, gather firewood, and maybe watch the sunrise over the mountains. There's still work to be done. But for now, take a deep breath and listen to the village wake up around you. You step outside into the pale dawn, your boots clicking lightly on the frost-hardened ground. The air is chilly on your cheeks, but you don't mind. It's the same cold that greeted your ancestors hundreds of years ago, the same cold that has forged the resilience of everyone who came before you. The medieval village stretches out before you like a still picture, wisps of smoke curling over thatched roofs, the soft bleating of sheep somewhere in the distance, the creaking of frozen hinges as neighbors peer out from their doors. Your breath clouds the air in tiny wisps, rhythmic like a steam engine, though, of course, no one here knows what an engine is. For you, life is measured not in hours but in chores. Morning chores await. First, the animals. You trudge toward the barn, where the cows and goats huddle together, their bodies forming a warm, panting mass. Their breath rises in misty clouds like yours. You pat the cow gently on the flank. She stirs but doesn't complain. It's too early to complain. Milking in the cold isn't glamorous. Your hands, stiff from the morning chill, fumble at first, but the rhythm quickly returns. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. The milk splashes into the wooden bucket, warm and alive, a small miracle in a world where survival depends on such small routines. After feeding the animals, you return to the cottage for breakfast, yesterday's coarse bread. Softened by fresh milk, there may be a scrap of cheese left over from last week, or a bit of lard to spread on the crust. Not much, but enough to keep you going. You chew slowly, listening to the familiar sounds of village life coming to a halt. By now, other villagers have appeared. A neighbor waves to you from across the street, red-faced but smiling. Another carries a small basket of firewood for the day's fires. Children run barefoot, for children seem somehow immune to frost laughing as they chase each other around the well. Then you hear it. The church bells ring, deep and deep, signaling the start of a new day, not with hands, but with sound. That bell rules everything. Work begins when it rings. Meals begin when it rings again. Rest when it rings in the evening. Now, it's the signal to go to the fields. Historians still debate how peasants balanced work and rest in the Middle Ages. Some argue that they had more free time than modern workers' holidays, religious holidays, and seasonal breaks. Others claim they work from dawn to dusk. The truth is probably both. But today is no holiday. It's just another winter morning, and the fields need tending, even if they're frozen solid. You grab your tools, a simple hoe, a wooden rake, and trudge out to the commons. Maybe you'll mend fences, check on stored vegetables, or help clear away fallen branches from the recent storm. It's not glamorous work, but it's necessary. The village depends on everyone doing their part. Your mind wanders as you walk, following old trails that have been carved into the ground for centuries. Just like your feet, you think about spring, about planting, about whether this year will have enough rain or too much. You wonder if the cow will have another calf, or if the new priest will repair the church roof. Small thoughts, but meaningful ones. The sun finally breaks over the horizon, painting the fields gold. The frost shimmers, and for a moment the cold feels more like a gift than a punishment. You stop, stand still, let the warmth of that single ray touch your face. It's a small victory, but you accept it. Because surviving the coldest nights isn't about fire or blankets. It's about community. It's about routine. And most of all, it's about hope that no matter how long the winter, dawn will always come. Now, take a slow breath. Relax your shoulders. Imagine you're still in that medieval village, but the work of the day is done. The fire crackles in the hearth. The animals have been fed. The tools have been rested, and so have you. The sun is higher, but it's still a soft light, not harsh, just warm enough to melt the frost from the roof. You lean back against the cottage wall, eyes half closed, listening to the hum of life around you, the chatter of your neighbors, the soft rustle of the wind in the trees, the distant song of a bird you can't name. Your breathing slows. Your body goes limp. Perhaps you imagine yourself wrapped in a thick woolen cloak again, feeling its weight pressing down on you like a cocoon of safety. The worries of the day fade away on the edges. Time passes. No rush, no deadlines, no pressure to be anywhere but here. You let your mind drift, like smoke rising from a chimney into the cool air. Thoughts come and go, but you don't have to chase them. Just breathe, just rest. The cold of winter doesn't bother you anymore. You're warm enough, you're safe enough. The hardest part of the night is over. Tomorrow will be here soon. Now. Sleep if you want, or stay in this peaceful moment a little longer, listening to the echoes of a world long gone, where life was simple and life moved slowly.